My son and his wife locked me in my own house and were trying to have me declared mentally incompetent, all so they could steal my life savings. They smiled to my face every single day, telling everyone they were just caring for me, while secretly draining my bank accounts to fund their lavish lifestyle. They even planned to be honored at a huge charity gala using my money, but they badly underestimated me. They had no idea I was about to turn their big night into the most public, satisfying, and humiliating downfall they could ever imagine. The pot roast, my late husband's favorite recipe, filled the house with the scent of Sunday. It was a smell of tradition, of family, of everything I thought was solid and real. My son Mark sat at the head of the table, looking happy and blessedly oblivious, going on about how wonderful his wife Stephanie was for organizing the St. Jude's charity auction. He was so proud of her. From the outside, we were the perfect picture: the respected parish matriarch, the successful son, the charming, capable daughter-in-law. But I've been a nurse for 40 years. You learn to spot a fever even when the patient insists they feel fine. And Stephanie had a fever. Her smile was a little too bright. Her compliments on my cooking a little too effusive. As she reached for the wine bottle to pour me another glass, I saw a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand. Her eyes, which were usually so focused, kept darting to the phone she had placed face down on the table, as if it might ring with bad news at any second. She caught me watching, and her smile tightened. She told Mark that I'd been doing so much for everyone lately, that it was really time I took a step back and let her handle the family's obligations. It sounded so caring, so thoughtful, but it felt like she was laying the first brick in a wall I couldn't see. In the weeks that followed, she built that wall higher brick by smiling brick. My life, once my own, became something she managed. My old friends from the parish would call, and Stephanie would answer, telling them with a sweet, concerned voice that I was resting and couldn't be disturbed. My mail started arriving in a neat, pre-sorted stack on the hall table. She was just helping me with the bills, she'd say, saving me the stress of it all. One afternoon, my neighbor Carol, who I've known for 30 years, stopped by with one of her famous tuna casseroles. Stephanie met her on the porch, and I watched through the window as she politely but firmly sent Carol away, explaining that I was on a new, strict health regimen. I wasn't sick. I wasn't tired. But I was becoming a prisoner in my own home, and my jailer always wore a beautiful, concerned smile. The day it all truly broke was a Tuesday. Stephanie swept in full of energy and excitement, clutching a leather-bound folder. She laid it on my kitchen table, her voice bubbling as she told me about a fantastic new investment plan she'd found for me. It would simplify everything, she explained, her hands fluttering over the papers. No more worrying about the market, no more complicated statements. She slid a single page from the stack, expertly covering the others. It was just a simple form, she said, to authorize her advisor to make trades on my behalf. A formality. She pointed to a line at the bottom, her manicured finger tapping the paper. All I had to do was sign right there, and we'd be all set. A flicker of unease, cold and sharp, went through me. But I looked at her eager, smiling face, the face of the woman my son loved, and I pushed the feeling down. This was family. You trust family. I took the pen she offered and signed my name. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud with that little flicker of unease that had grown into a gnawing worry. I got up for a glass of water, walking quietly down the hall. Mark and Stephanie were staying in the guest room, and as I passed their door, I heard a sound. A sharp, desperate whisper. It was Stephanie on the phone. Her voice was stripped of all its usual charm. It was raw, panicked, and ugly. She hissed that the extension was denied, that she had until the 30th to make the payment, or they would start proceedings. Then came the words that stopped my heart. She whispered that he, Mark, didn't know, that if he found out the business was gone, she couldn't let that happen. She'd find the money. After all, she'd just signed the papers today. The funds would be accessible in a few days. Each word was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The investment plan, the loving care, the concerned smiles was all a lie. This wasn't a gesture of help. It was a heist. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now, let's get back to it. I stood in that dark hallway for what felt like an hour, the echo of Stephanie's whispered words carving a hole in my heart. The shock was a physical thing, a cold weight in my stomach. But as the minutes ticked by, the shock began to cool and harden into something else. It became resolve. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark and let the betrayal wash over me until all the hurt and confusion were gone and only a cold, clear purpose remained. I was a nurse. I knew how to handle a crisis. You don't panic. You assess, you plan, and you act with precision. The next morning, I came down to breakfast as if nothing had happened. I smiled, commented on the weather, and poured myself a cup of coffee. Stephanie watched me. Her eyes narrowed, searching for any sign that something was amiss. I gave her nothing. I was the picture of a harmless old woman. While she was distracted by a text message on her phone, I turned to my son. I made my voice sound airy, a little forgetful. I told Mark how wonderful it was that Stephanie was taking care of my finances, and then I delivered the first careful probe. I mentioned the wonderful investment she'd set up for me with a company called Belmont Financial. I told him I just hoped they would coordinate properly with his old friend David from Beacon Hill Investments because I didn't want my tax liabilities to get messy. I just made the name up on the spot. Belmont Financial didn't exist. The effect was instantaneous and deeply satisfying. Stephanie's head shot up from her phone and every drop of color drained from her face. Mark, bless his ignorant heart, just looked confused. He told me, "No, Mom, we've always used Beacon Hill." He asked Stephanie what I was talking about. You could practically smell the panic coming off her. She started stammering something about a new specialized fund, about diversifying assets. Mark, trying to be the dutiful husband, jumped in to back her up, but his explanation was completely different from hers. He thought it was a new bond fund. She said it was for tech stocks. Their stories tangled and collapsed in midair. It was pathetic. In that moment, watching them flounder, I saw them for what they really were. Not clever, malicious criminals. Just two desperate, frightened people who were in way over their heads. And that made them predictable. Later that afternoon, I told them I had a dreadful headache and was going to lie down for a nap. It was the perfect excuse. I went to my room, locked the door, and walked straight to the back of my closet. Behind a stack of old hat boxes, I retrieved a small, cheap burner phone I'd bought years ago after our parish priest gave a seminar on emergency preparedness. My husband Bill had teased me about it, but I always believed in being prepared. My hands were shaking, but my voice was firm when I made the call. It went to Frank Bill's old poker buddy, a retired Boston police detective who owed me for nursing his wife through pneumonia last winter. I kept it brief. I told him it was Diana Brooks, and I needed a recommendation for a very good, very discreet forensic accountant, and a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud. Frank is old school. He didn't ask a single question. He just said he'd make some calls. My first ally was in place. I was no longer alone in this fight. But my little test at breakfast had spooked them badly. That evening they came to me together, their faces a mask of strained concern. They had made an appointment for me, they said, with a new doctor. Just for a checkup, A cognitive assessment, Stephanie called it. My own doctor of 30 years apparently wasn't good enough. The next day, the old landline phone went dead. A technical issue Mark explained as a technician installed a new, simpler model. It had 3 buttons pre-programmed with their numbers, no dial pad, no way to call out. They hadn't just built a gilded cage, they had soundproofed it. I finally understood the full scope of their plan. This wasn't just a robbery. They needed to do more than just take my money. They needed to erase me. They needed to make me an unreliable witness, a confused old woman whose claims could be easily dismissed. The danger wasn't just to my bank account anymore. It was to my name, my mind, my very existence. When you're facing a superior force, you don't meet it head on. You retreat, you regroup, you find another way. They wanted a confused, frail old woman. Fine. I would give them one. I executed a strategic retreat into the role they had written for me. I started asking what day it was. I would trail off mid-sentence looking lost. When Stephanie took my arm to guide me to a chair, I leaned on her heavily. I let my hand tremble when I reached for a glass of water. I played the part of the fading matriarch so perfectly that the tension in the house began to dissolve. Mark and Stephanie started exchanging relaxed, knowing glances over my head. Their relief was a tangible thing. They believed my little spark of defiance at the breakfast table had been the last flicker of a dying fire. They thought they had won. Their arrogance was becoming my greatest weapon. In the quiet moments when they left me to rest, I tried to understand how it had come to this. Stephanie wasn't born a monster. I remembered the bright, ambitious young woman my son brought home, the one who wanted to build her own marketing empire. And as I sat in the silence, I could almost picture her story, a tragedy of pride played out in the affluent suburbs of Boston. I saw her in my mind's eye 6 months ago, weeping in her sleek office after losing her biggest client. I could feel the cold dread as she took out that first high-interest loan, convinced it was a temporary fix. Then a second. I could imagine her hands shaking as she hid the maxed-out credit card statements from Mark, her terror of admitting failure in a world where success is everything. The final desperate act, transferring money from her own children's education fund just to make payroll. It wasn't a story of pure greed. It was a cascade of terrible decisions, each one fueled by the shame of not living up to the perfect image she had built. Understanding it didn't excuse it, but it sharpened my focus. I wasn't just fighting a thief. I was fighting a terrified woman who had lost her way. While they were out confident that I was safely tucked away, I was secretly at work. My long naps were my new office hours. My grandson had given me a tablet computer for Christmas, and I'd made a big show of being baffled by it. Now it was my lifeline. It was hidden under my mattress, fully charged. Frank had sent a secure email with the contact information for the team he'd assembled. Guided by a forensic accountant named Maria, I began my digital excavation. I accessed my online banking records, downloading years of statements, flagging every suspicious transfer. One afternoon, I went into my husband's old study. Bill was a cautious man. Tucked behind a false back in his bookshelf was a small safe he'd installed decades ago. Inside were the original deeds to the house stock certificates and a thick envelope with $10,000 in cash. Seeing his careful handwriting, feeling the weight of the documents in my hands, I felt his presence, his strength. I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was reassembling the armor my husband had left behind for me. Their sense of security made them careless. Stephanie, believing I was sound asleep, began taking her important calls in the hallway just outside my room. One afternoon, I heard her talking to someone from the parish, her voice dripping with false modesty. She was confirming the details for the annual fundraising gala, the biggest social event of the year. I heard her laugh, a sound that was both light and incredibly ugly. She told the person on the other end that yes, thanks to her mother-in-law's incredibly generous donation, they had exceeded all their fundraising goals for the year. My donation. She was using my money, the money she was stealing from me, to buy herself a starring role in the community I had spent my life building. The rage that went through me was cold and pure. She wasn't just stealing my savings. She was stealing my name. She was stealing my legacy. And she was going to use it to be honored on a stage in front of my entire world. That's when I knew exactly where and when my counterattack would begin. For a week, I was a ghost in my own home, a creature of naps and quiet confusion. I let them believe I was fading, and with every passing day, they grew more confident, more relaxed, more focused on Stephanie's upcoming triumph at the parish gala. They had no idea that in the quiet of my room, I was on the tablet with my team planning a war. We decided to strike the day before the gala, the moment when Stephanie's pride and anticipation would be at their absolute peak. The doorbell rang just after lunch. I heard Stephanie answer it, her voice sharp with annoyance at the interruption. Through the crack in my bedroom door, I watched. On the porch stood a man and a woman, both dressed in severe dark suits. The man was Arthur Vance, the lawyer Frank had found for me. His voice was calm, polite, and completely unyielding as he informed my daughter-in-law that they were here to see Mrs. Diana Brooks regarding an urgent legal matter. He presented a court order that gave him immediate access, a document my new legal team had secured that morning. I saw the flash of pure animal panic in Stephanie's eyes, and then I made my entrance. I had been waiting dressed not in my usual robe and slippers, but in a sharp tweed suit my husband had always loved. I walked calmly down the stairs, each step firm and deliberate. The performance was over. We convened in the living room, the formal space where we entertained guests, and it felt like a courtroom. Arthur didn't waste time. He systematically laid out the case my team had built. He placed a binder on the coffee table and opened it to a bank statement. He pointed to a wire transfer for $250,000 moved from my account just 3 days after I signed Stephanie's papers. Then he produced the forensic accountant's report, a neat, horrifying flowchart that showed my money being funneled through a shell LLC and paid directly to Stephanie's creditors. The final exhibit was a sworn affidavit from my actual doctor of 30 years stating that I was, and I quote, in perfect cognitive health and of exceptionally sound mind. With every new piece of evidence, Stephanie seemed to shrink. The cold, hard, irrefutable proof was a physical weight crushing her. Her carefully constructed facade didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. She collapsed into an armchair, her body racked with deep, ugly sobs. She gasped that she had to do it, that the business had failed, that the loans were due, and they were going to take her house. She cried that she never meant to hurt me, that she was just trying to protect her family. The whole desperate, shameful story came pouring out in a flood of tears and excuses. My son Mark was frozen. He stood there pale and silent, looking from his weeping wife to me, his calm and resolute mother. For months he had wrapped himself in a comfortable blanket of willful ignorance, choosing to believe the easy lies, because the truth was too much work. Now the truth was screaming in his living room. The confession shattered his denial. I saw his face harden as the full weight of the deception landed on him, the realization of his own passive role in it all. He turned to Stephanie and his voice was a raw whisper when he asked her if she had lied to him. That was it. That was the moment their conspiracy, their marriage, their entire shared life began to dissolve into a hopeless mess of blame and betrayal. The ally Stephanie had counted on was gone. I stood up. I was no longer the frail victim, the confused old woman. I was the matriarch of this family, and I was back in command. My voice was quiet, without a trace of malice, but it was filled with the unshakable authority of a judge delivering a final verdict. I told Stephanie that there would be no gala for her tomorrow. Her first task was to call the parish office and inform them that she had a family emergency and would be unable to attend. I told them that they would both sit right there and listen to Mr. Vance as he explained the terms of the restitution agreement he had prepared. And then I delivered the final blow. I informed them that they would not be making decisions anymore. I would. The power in the room had shifted completely and irrevocably. The fear that had been my constant companion for weeks had finally left me. It now resided entirely with my son and my daughter-in-law, who sat there broken and terrified of the public consequences that I had only just begun to unleash. After the storm in my living room, a strange, quiet calm settled over the house. Stephanie and Mark signed the restitution agreement under the stony gaze of my lawyer. They were broken, hollowed-out shells of the people they had pretended to be. Stephanie made the call to the parish office, her voice a monotone, as she explained she was withdrawing from the gala due to a sudden and severe family emergency. The first part of my plan was complete, but the private reckoning was never going to be enough. Stephanie hadn't just tried to steal my money, she had tried to steal my name in the very community my husband and I had helped build. The final judgment had to be public. The next evening, I walked into the parish fundraising gala on the arm of my old friend, Frank. The ballroom was glittering, filled with the most influential people in our community. I wasn't there as a forgotten elder or a frail woman in need of care. I was there as a guest of honor at the head table, a seat that had originally been reserved for Stephanie. I moved through the room with a quiet grace I hadn't felt in months. People noticed. The whispers started almost immediately. They saw me looking strong and composed, and they saw the empty chairs where Stephanie and Mark were supposed to be. You could feel the questions hanging in the air, a low hum of confusion and curiosity beneath the polite chatter. The evening reached its peak when our parish priest, Father Michael, stepped up to the podium to begin the speeches. A hush fell over the crowd, and in that perfect moment of shared silence, the trap was sprung. A single phone buzzed at the press table where a young journalist from the local Boston Globe affiliate was seated. He looked down. His eyes widened and he began typing furiously. Then another phone lit up, and another. An article meticulously prepared by my lawyer, Arthur Vance, and released at that exact moment, had just gone live. The headline was a masterpiece of devastating clarity. Prominent local family embroiled in elder fraud allegations. Daughter-in-law accused of siphoning funds from retired nurse. Like a contagion, the news spread through the ballroom. One by one, phones were pulled from pockets and purses. The whispers turned into audible gasps. The polite smiles on people's faces were replaced by masks of shock and disbelief. The judgment wasn't loud. It was silent and it was absolute. It came from the horrified faces of the very people Stephanie had worked so desperately to impress. I saw the head of the fundraising committee, a woman Stephanie considered her mentor, go pale as she read the details. I saw the women from the country club staring at their screens, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. They weren't judging a stranger. They were judging one of their own, and the verdict was brutal. This was Stephanie's true punishment. It wasn't a courtroom or a jail cell. It was the complete and utter annihilation of the social status she had sacrificed her integrity, her honor, and her family to build. I didn't have to say a single word. My community, the people who had known me for 50 years, were my jury. The final perfect detail of my plan was laid out in the article itself for everyone to see. It explained that I had already filed a civil suit to reclaim my assets. But it also stated that I was willing to forego pressing criminal charges on two conditions: that a full and immediate restitution was made, and that my daughter-in-law agreed to seek professional financial and psychological counseling. It wasn't cruel. It was just. It was a proportionate consequence that offered a path forward, but only through accountability. In that moment, I reclaimed everything. The power of attorney was nullified. My financial independence was restored. But most importantly, I had established a boundary of fire around my life. My victory wasn't in their destruction. It was in my complete and total restoration. I had taken back my home, my money, and my name. The night of the gala, I went home and slept more soundly than I had in months. The victory wasn't loud or explosive. It was a deep, quiet settling of the world back onto its proper axis. The consequences for Stephanie and Mark, however, were immediate and brutal. Their carefully curated world crumbled overnight. Invitations to dinner parties were politely rescinded. Friends they'd known for years would suddenly cross the street to avoid them at the grocery store. The family emergency excuse they'd given the parish lasted less than a day, before the truth in all its sordid detail became the only topic of conversation in town. Within a month, a for sale sign was hammered into the lush lawn of their oversized house. They had to sell it to begin making the restitution payments. That sign was more than a financial necessity. It was a public monument to their failure and undeniable admission that the perfect life they had projected was nothing but a fragile illusion built on debt and deceit. In the fallout, my son and his wife chose two very different paths. Mark, humbled to his core and deeply ashamed of his own passive complicity, began the slow, painful work of taking accountability. He sold his expensive car and took a second job working nights, not just for the money, but as a form of penance. He started going to therapy, trying to unravel the knot of weakness inside himself that had allowed him to look away while his wife drove their family over a cliff. He was trying to become the man his father had always hoped he would be, but it was a long road. Stephanie, however, remained trapped in a prison of her own bitterness. She never found redemption because she never looked for it. In her mind, she was the victim. She blamed me for not just giving her the money. She blamed the economy, her former clients, her bad luck, everyone and everything, but the choices she had made. Her path wasn't one of healing, but of a lonely, self-imposed exile, consumed by a resentment that left no room for anything else. As for me, I was finally free. The gilded cage was gone, and the world opened up again. I reconnected with my old friends, having long lunches with Carol and the other women from my bridge club, laughing until my sides hurt. The quiet of my house was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. With the first restitution payment, I did something that felt right. I went to Father Michael and used a portion of the funds to establish a new charity at the parish. We called it the St. Jude Fund, a small, discreet source of aid for families facing an unexpected crisis so that no one would ever have to feel the same desperation that drove Stephanie to do what she did. It was a way to turn the ugliest chapter of my life into something good for the community I loved. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a leader. Months later, the new reality had settled into a quiet rhythm. I was in my garden, the sun warm on my back, teaching my youngest grandson Leo how to plant roses. Mark stood at the edge of the lawn. He had brought Leo for his weekly visit, a supervised arrangement we had agreed upon. There was no easy warmth between us anymore, just a sad, formal understanding. He apologized again for the 1,000th time. I simply nodded and turned my attention back to the little boy with my husband's eyes. Leo asked me why we had to pull out all the little green sprouts around the new rose bush. I pointed with my trowel. I told him that the secret to strong roots is to clear away all the weeds that try to choke them out. He nodded, his face serious, and got back to work. I looked at my garden, at the new life we were planting, and I felt a sense of profound peace. I was the unshakable matriarch, strong and whole, living in the light of the truth. My son and his wife were left to live in the shadows they had created for themselves. In the end, Diana's victory wasn't just about the money. It was about restoring the quiet order of her own life. She came to understand that the deepest betrayals rarely spring from pure evil, but from the dark soil of fear and desperation. Stephanie's terror of being seen as a failure had become a poison, threatening to choke everything good. Like a wise gardener, Diana learned that to protect what you love, you must sometimes make the hard choice to clear away the weeds, no matter how long they've been part of the landscape. The truest strength she found wasn't in the fight itself, but in drawing a firm, quiet boundary that finally allowed for peace and new growth.